Late August 1944. Dawn has not yet arrived. A French highway lies like a dark ribbon across fields flattened by war. Rain clings to the asphalt in thin, trembling films that catch the faint glow of hooded headlights. Engines idle in a low, restless, chorus diesel breathing, metal ticking as it cools. Tires hissing against wet gravel. Hundreds of trucks stretch beyond sight, their silhouettes dissolving into mist. The air smells of fuel, oil, and damp earth. Men sit behind steering wheels, faces pale in dashboard light, eyes hollow from too many nights without sleep. Somewhere ahead, a signal flare dies, leaving only the pulse of distant artillery and the hum of generators from a field depot that has run dry. A map is spread across a makeshift table, fingers tracing routes that lead east toward rivers, cities, and a retreating enemy General Patton's Third Army is not stopped by German fire. It is halted by emptiness in steel tanks meant to carry the war forward. Every minute of stillness feels heavy, as if the entire campaign is holding its breath. The pause on this road exists because the war has moved faster than the supplies meant to feed it. June 6, 1944 begins before sunrise, with water that feels colder than it looks. The English Channel is never truly calm. It breathes, rolls, and resists. At 6:30, the first American troops step off landing craft onto Omaha and Utah beaches. Metal scrapes against sand. Men fall. Others push forward. Smoke drifts low, mixing with salt spray. The invasion is successful, but it's slow, uneven, and brutally expensive. Behind every infantryman wading ashore, an invisible problem is already growing. The Allies have landed armies without a fully functioning port. Cherbourg, the closest deep-water harbor, is still in German hands. Mulberry artificial harbors rise from the sea-like improvised cities of steel, yet storms batter them within weeks. Supplies must flow, but the channels are fragile. Ammunition, fuel, rations, spare parts, and vehicles pile up along beaches that were never meant to sustain a continental war. Normandy itself works against speed. The Beaucasins, hedgerows, sunken lanes, and narrow roads turns every advance into a maze. Sherman tanks inch forward behind infantry, cutting through earth banks with steel prongs. German defenders cling to fortified positions. Progress is measured in yards, not miles. Each step forward requires trucks to creep closer, bring in food shells, and fuel through terrain that swallows wheels whole in mud. By mid, the American logistical system is already under strain. Supply depots sprawl across fields that were once farmland. Rail lines are shattered by Allied bombing. Roads are narrow and clogged. Traffic control becomes a silent battlefield of its own military police, directing endless streams of vehicles, trying to prevent chaos from halting the entire operation. Yet beneath this grinding struggle, something larger is taking shape. American industry is now fully mobilized. Liberty ships arrive daily. Stacked with material, thousands of vehicles pour onto French soil. Jeeps, half-tracks, artillery tractors, and the heavy, reliable GMC cargo trucks that will soon become the backbone of the campaign. The scale is staggering. War is no longer just about soldiers. It is about movement, throughput, and the ability to keep armies fed as they fight. By late July, the front remains compressed along a narrow strip of Normandy. German resistance is stubborn. Casualties mount. Patton watches from the wings, waiting. His Third Army is formed, but not yet unleashed. Planners know that when the front finally breaks, speed will be everything, and speed will depend entirely on fuel. Operation Cobra begins on July 25, 1944. A carpet of American bombers pounds German positions west of Saint-Lay. The ground trembles. Trees vanish. Fortifications collapse. In the smoke and dust, infantry and armor push through the shattered line. For the first time since D-Day, the war in France begins to open up. The breakout is not clean. It is violent and chaotic. German units retreat in fragments. Some are encircled, others slip away. Roads that once led nowhere now stretch ahead, largely undefended. Patton's Third Army finally enters the fight. racing south and east with a momentum that feels almost unstoppable. Towns fall in rapid succession. Abranches, Le Mans, Hallen, On. Columns of tanks and trucks pour forward in long, rolling streams. Patton demands pace, relentless pace. He wants pursuit, not pause. His armored divisions slash across open countryside, often outpacing infantry and artillery that cannot keep up. But with every mile gained, the distance from Normandy's beaches grows. Fuel consumption skyrockets. A single armored division can burn tens of thousands of gallons a day. Every tank, every truck, every generator depends on a steady flow of gasoline that must travel over broken roads, through traffic bottlenecks, and across a front that is still fluid. Railways are not yet repaired. Pipelines do not yet exist. The war is being carried forward almost entirely on rubber tires. By early August, the paradox of success becomes clear. The Allies are winning faster than they can supply themselves. German defenses are collapsing, yet the logistical tail stretches thinner with every advance. Supply depots lag far behind the fighting units. Tank columns occasionally halt, not because of enemy fire, but because their fuel gauges sit at zero. It is in this widening gap between movement and supply that doubt begins to form among German commanders watching from afar, among Allied planners nervous about overextension, and even among some American officers who wonder whether the advance has become unsustainable. Meanwhile, the battlefield continues to shift. The Falaise pocket closes in mid-August, trapping tens of thousands of German troops. The German army in France begins to disintegrate. Paris lies ahead, and beyond it the heart of Europe. The war seems to be accelerating toward a decisive conclusion, yet the decisive factor is no longer just tanks and infantry. It is something quieter, less visible, and far more complex. The ability to move vast quantities of fuel and supplies across hundreds of miles of war-torn France. The beaches of Normandy, once the fragile starting point of the invasion, now feel impossibly far behind. And the farther the armies move from them, the more the entire campaign depends on a system of roads, trucks, and drivers that must somehow keep pace with Patton's hunger for speed. That growing distance sets the stage for a new kind of battle one fought not with guns, but with gasoline, logistics, and endless lines of trucks. As August deepens, the war in France becomes less about front lines and more about arteries. Roads replace trenches, crossroads replace command posts. The map is no longer a series of static positions. It is a web of movement that must pulse without interruption. Behind Patton's racing spearheads sits an immense logistical organism built in layers. At its base are the beaches of Normandy still crowded with cranes, barges, and landing craft, disgorging supplies day and night. From there, goods move to forward dumps scattered across fields and orchards. Piles of ammunition, drooms of fuel, stacks of rations, spare engines, and replacement tires. Every crate is catalogued, every shipment tracked, every shortage felt somewhere down the line. Railways, shattered by months of Allied bombing, are slowly being restored by engineer units working under constant pressure. Bridges are repaired, tracks realigned, and locomotives pressed back into service. Yet reconstruction cannot keep pace with the speed of the advance. Trains remain a promise of future efficiency, not a solution to the present urgency. In the meantime, the burden falls almost entirely on trucks. The American army has entered France with a scale of motorization unprecedented in warfare. Tens of thousands of 2.5-ton GMC trucks, SACE cargo carriers, and heavy transporters now clog every usable road. They carry everything. Gasoline in jerrycans and tanker trailers, artillery shells, medical supplies, mail, spare parts, food, and sometimes exhausted soldiers catching a brief ride forward. Traffic control becomes as critical as firepower. Military police stand at intersections around the clock, waving columns through, redirecting others, preventing bottlenecks that could paralyze entire divisions. Signs are painted in chalk on barn walls. Route numbers are stenciled onto telegraph poles. Entire stretches of highway are reserved for supply traffic alone. Patton's Third Army, activated on August 1st, 1944, embodies both the strength and the vulnerability of this system. Its armored and mechanized divisions, fast, aggressive, and ruthless in pursuit, consume fuel at a staggering rate. A single Sherman tank can burn hundreds of gallons in a day of sustained movement. A full armored division may require more than 300,000 gallons daily. Multiply that across multiple divisions, and the numbers become almost abstract in scale. Patton knows this. He does not slow down. Instead, he presses forward, gambling that logistics will somehow keep up. His headquarters issues blunt orders. Keep moving. To him, hesitation is a greater risk than shortage. He believes that speed itself can collapse German resistance and shorten the war. Allied planners are less certain. At SHAEF, Eisenhower's staff watches the situation with a mixture of awe and anxiety. They see a historic opportunity, Germany in retreat, France opening before them, but they also see fuel consumption charts climbing faster than supply curves. Every mile Patton gains adds hours of driving time for the trucks that must feed him. This tension gives birth to one of the most remarkable logistical efforts of the war. The Red Ball Express. In late August 1944, the U.S. Army designates a priority supply route from Normandy to the forward areas. Two main highways are selected, one for trucks heading east, one for trucks returning west. They are marked with red circles, a symbol that gives the operation its name. Civilian traffic is banned. Military traffic moves in one direction only. The Red Ball Express is designed as a conveyor belt on wheels. Thousands of mostly black American soldiers, drivers, mechanics, dispatchers are assigned to keep it running. They drive day and night, often with minimal rest, through bombed towns, cratered roads, and constant danger. Headlights are dimmed to avoid enemy aircraft. Convoys stretch for miles, a continuous river of steel and rubber. Rules are strict. If a truck breaks down, it must be pushed to the side. The column cannot stop. Replacement vehicles move forward. The mission is simple and brutal. Deliver fuel to Patton at all costs. Yet even this extraordinary system faces limits. Fuel depots near the front are sometimes empty before the next convoy arrives. Weather turns roads into mud. Accidents multiply as exhausted drivers struggle to stay awake. German remnants still lurk along supply routes, attacking isolated trucks or ambushing small groups. Meanwhile, skeptics both German and Allied begin to voice doubts. German commanders, observing the American advance from the east, assume it cannot last. They believe that an army so far from its ports must eventually stall. To them, the American push looks like a brilliant sprint that will collapse under its own logistical weight. Some Allied officers quietly share similar concerns. They worry that Patton is outrunning not only his supplies, but also the broader strategic plan. What happens if his fuel runs out deep inside France? What if a German counterattack cuts his supply lines? Still, the machine grinds forward. New depots are established closer to the front. Night on the Red Ball Express has a rhythm that never truly stops. Engines drone in a steady, low register, like a mechanical heartbeat that stretches across France. Men sit behind cracked steering wheels, backs stiff, eyes burning, knuckles white around the rim. Most of them are barely out of their teens. Few had driven anything more complex than a farm truck before the war. Now they are responsible for keeping an entire army alive. They drive in darkness with headlights hooded, reducing the world to a narrow tunnel of asphalt and painted lines. Rain streaks the windshield. Dust seeps through seams in the cab and coats every surface with a fine, gritty film. The smell of gasoline clings to their uniforms, their skin, their breath. Some sing quietly to stay awake. Others chew on cigarettes. Long gone cold breakdowns are constant companions. A burst tire, an overheating engine, a snapped axle, any of these could mean disaster if they halt the column. But the rules of the Red Ball are unforgiving. A stalled truck must be pushed aside. The line cannot stop. Mechanics work with flashlights, hands black with grease, swapping parts in minutes that would normally take hours. Sometimes there is no time, and a vehicle is simply abandoned. Fatigue becomes the enemy. Men hallucinate from lack of sleep, seeing trucks that are not there, hearing voices over the engine noise. Yet they keep driving because they know what is at the end of the road. Armored divisions waiting for fuel, artillery batteries waiting for shells, medics waiting for supplies. Every mile they cover is a mile closer to keeping the advance alive. They are rarely celebrated. Their names do not appear in headlines. They do not capture cities or storm beaches. But without them, Patton's tanks would be silent. Stranded monuments of steel, the human cost of movement, rotting bodies, sleepless nights, broken trucks, and lives lost to accidents or ambush flows quietly beneath the glitter of battlefield glory. Their endurance becomes its own form of combat, fought not with rifles, but with steering wheels, wrenches, and sheer will. And as dawn breaks again over the highways of France, another convoy rolls east, carrying the lifeblood of an army that cannot afford to stop. Patton's doctrine is simple in language, but brutal in practice. Keep moving, no matter what. To him, momentum is a weapon. A retreating enemy is a vulnerable enemy. A halted enemy is an enemy that can regroup, reinforce, and counterattack. Every hour of delay is an opportunity handed back to the Germans. In August 1944, that philosophy collides directly with logistical reality. An armored division in full pursuit is a voracious machine. Shermans burn fuel at an astonishing rate when advancing at speed. Half-tracks, trucks, and support vehicles multiply that demand. Artillery units require constant resupply of ammunition. Infantry need food, water, and medical support. None of this can be improvised at the front. It must be carried forward from distant depots. Patton pushes anyway. His columns fan out across open roads, exploiting gaps in German defenses with aggressive thrusts toward key objectives: crossroads, river crossings, and transportation hubs. The tactical brilliance is undeniable. German units are overrun before they can establish coherent defensive lines. Towns fall with minimal resistance. The Third Army seems to flow across the map like a tidal wave. But every rapid advance stretches the supply lines thinner. Trucks must travel farther each day to reach the front. Turnaround times increase. Traffic congestion worsens. Small delays compound into major shortages. A division might reach its objective only to find its fuel nearly exhausted, forcing a halt that gives the Germans precious breathing room. This tension defines the tactical dilemma of the campaign. Should Patton slow down to preserve supply stability, or press on and risk temporary paralysis? He chooses speed, again and again. The Red Ball Express becomes the tactical enabler of that choice. By prioritizing fuel delivery above all else, it allows Patton to sustain an operational tempo that few believed possible. Yet even this system cannot eliminate friction entirely. Whether terrain, mechanical failure, and simple human limits continue to shape what is possible in Tissance. The battle across France is not just fought between armies. It is fought between movement and logistics, between the desire to race forward and the capacity to keep that race fueled. And in that struggle, every decision carries consequences measured not only in territory gained, but in gallons burned and miles driven. If Patton's tanks are the spear, the American truck is the shaft that carries it. The backbone of the U.S. logistical system in France is the GMC 2.5-ton 6.6 cargo truck, rugged, reliable, and produced in staggering numbers. Designed for versatility rather than elegance, it can carry fuel, ammunition, food, or troops with equal efficiency. Its all-wheel drive capability allows it to traverse mud, broken roads, and rough terrain that would immobilize civilian vehicles. Thousands of these trucks pour off Liberty ships and into the war zone, forming rolling arteries that connect beachhead to battlefield. Tanker trailers follow behind, hauling gasoline in bulk. Smaller vehicles carry jerrycans stacked in precarious but efficient rows. Maintenance units keep entire fleets running, cannibalizing damaged trucks for parts when supply runs short. Technology here is not glamorous, but it is decisive. Standardization becomes a quiet superpower. The U.S. Army uses common parts across vast numbers of vehicles, simplifying repairs and reducing downtime. Spare engines, tires, and transmissions can be swapped rapidly. Manuals are clear. Training is systematic. The result is a machine that, while imperfect, can absorb immense stress without collapsing. Fuel handling itself becomes a logistical technology. Specialized equipment allows for faster loading and unloading. Depots are organized for efficiency rather than proximity. Procedures are developed to minimize spillage and maximize throughput. Even the humble jerrycan barrode, and improved from German design, proves invaluable for transporting fuel over short distances. Communication also plays a role. Radios coordinate convoys. Traffic control posts relay information about accidents, road conditions, and enemy activity. Route planning evolves in real time, adapting to shifting front lines and infrastructure damage. Yet the system is never purely mechanical. Behind every truck stands a driver. Behind every repair stands a mechanic. Behind every depot stands a network of planners and quartermasters balancing demand and supply under relentless pressure. The technology amplifies their efforts, but it does not replace them. Together, trucks, fuel, roads, and men form a single, interconnected machine, vast, noisy, and indispensable. In August 1944, that machine is pushed to its limits. It creaks, strains, and occasionally falters. But it does not break. And as Patton's armored columns surge across France, it is this technological foundation, millions of moving parts working in grim coordination, that makes his advance possible. The three angles: human endurance, tactical momentum, and industrial machinery now converge on the same reality. Movement is power, but movement depends on logistics. That realization will shape every decision in the weeks to come. Angle 4. Leadership. Patton versus the planners. Patton moves like a force of nature that has learned to wear a uniform. His headquarters is rarely still. Maps cover walls. Arrows stab eastward. Staff officers work in constant motion, drafting orders that demand speed, audacity, and unrelenting pressure. Patton's voice, sharp and impatient, cuts through every hesitation. To him, delay is decay. He believes that a retreating enemy must never be given time to breathe. Every halt, even for a supply, feels like a concession. He measures success in miles gained, crossroads seized, and enemy formations shattered before they can regroup. In August 1944, that philosophy dropped. Late August 1944 arrives with a weight that feels heavier than summer heat alone. The Third Army is no longer racing it, is stretching. Roads that once carried momentum now carry anxiety. Every mile east feels farther than the last, not because of German resistance, but because of the growing emptiness in fuel tanks that were never meant to run dry. By August 23rd to 24th, Patton's spearheads are deep across northern and central France. Armored columns have crossed the Loire, pushed toward the Seine, and driven within striking distance of Paris and beyond. On paper, the map shows brilliance, arrows cutting cleanly through German lines, towns falling in rapid succession, and retreating enemy formations dissolving into chaos. On Tegrun, the picture is more fragile. Fuel depots near the front are shrinking to skeleton levels. Drums stand open and empty. Tanker trucks arrive hours late, or not at all. At forward refueling points, mechanics and quartermasters ration gasoline with a precision that feels almost surgical. Every drop is measured. Every gallon is accounted for. Priorities are decided in tense, hurried conversations. Which division moves first, which unit waits, which thrust must pause. In several armored formations, Shermans sit idling at crossroads, their crews waiting with engines running low, gauges trembling near zero. Infantry units, forced to slow their march, watch dust clouds on the horizon that no longer signal relentless pursuit, but a system beginning to falter. Artillery batteries conserve shells, knowing that resupply is uncertain. The Red Bull Express is now operating at full strain. Along Route Nationale 13 and Route Nationale 12, the primary Red Bull arteries convoys move in an unbroken line, bumper to bumper, day and night. Drivers push beyond exhaustion. Trucks break down in increasing numbers. Overheated engines, shredded tires, clogged fuel lines, snapped axles from cratered roads. Military police struggle to keep traffic flowing as accidents multiply at dangerous intersections. Weather turns against them. Sudden late summer storms flood, lulling roads, forcing detours that add hours to already stretched journeys. Mud clings to wheels and slows movement. Visibility drops, increasing the risk of collisions. Every delay compounds the crisis. At depots near the beaches, the problem is not a lack of fuel in transit, is the challenge of moving enough of it fast enough. Ports remain congested. Unloading takes time. Rail repairs lag behind the pace of advance. Pipelines are still weeks away from completion. For now, everything rides on rubber tires and human endurance. Patton's headquarters becomes a focal point of pressure. Maps are updated constantly. Reports arrive in clipped, urgent phrases. Division fuel critical. Advance halted at tanker column delayed near Ellen. Patton paces, jaw tight, boots striking the floor with a sharp, impatient rhythm. To him, the pause feels intolerable, not because the Germans have stopped him, but because his own supply system has. He presses his staff hard. Orders fly outward to prioritize fuel for specific spearheads. Quartermasters scramble to reallocate shipments. Convoys are rerouted in real time. Every decision carries risk. Fuel one thrust, and another may stall. Split resources too thin, and both may fail. Meanwhile, German remnants still lurk along supply routes. Isolated ambushes flare up at night. A few trucks are lost to small arms, fire, or mines. More are destroyed by accidents than by enemy action. But each loss tightens the sense that the system is operating on a knife's edge. Wrecked vehicles line certain stretches of road like silent warnings. At the front, the consequences become visible. Near Chartres and Dreux, elements of Patton's armor slow to a crawl. In some sectors, units halt entirely, forced to wait for the next fuel convoy. Commanders on the ground feel the frustration acutely. They can see the retreating enemy. They know that every hour of delay gives German forces a chance to escape, reorganize, or fortify river lines. In Paris, the situation is equally tense. French resistance fighters have begun to rise in open revolt against German occupation. Allied commanders are torn between political urgency and logistical reality. Patton's army could potentially reach the city quickly, but without assured fuel. Any dash risks leaving armored units stranded in urban streets, vulnerable and cut off. At SHAEF, Eisenhower and his planners watch the crisis unfold with careful concern. They understand that Patton's momentum has brought the Allies to the brink of a decisive breakthrough, but also that an uncontrolled push could overextend the entire campaign. The question is no longer whether the Germans can stop the Americans in battle. It is whether American logistics can sustain American success. By August 25th, the tension reaches its peak. Some forward units report fuel levels measured in hours, not days. Tank crews idle engines only when absolutely necessary. Drivers on the Red Ball Express push through hallucinations and exhaustion, knowing that if they fail, entire divisions may grind to a halt. The war feels suspended in a precarious balance. On one side stands Patton's aggressive, fast-moving army, poised to sweep across France and beyond. On the other stands a logistical network stretched to its limits, struggling to feed that very advance. Between them lies a thin line of gasoline moving, uncertain and absolutely vital. The road ahead is open. The enemy is retreating. And yet, for the first time since the breakout from Normandy, the greatest threat to Patton's Third Army is not German resistance. It is the empty space inside a fuel tank. That fragile pause measured in gallons, miles, and menace now hangs over the entire campaign like a silent verdict waiting to be delivered. The morning of August 26, 1944, begins with motion. Not the chaotic motion of retreat or the jagged movement of battle, but the controlled, relentless motion of logistics finding its rhythm again. Along the Red Ball routes, convoys roll before first light. Headlights hooded, engines steady. Something subtle has shifted. The bottlenecks are easing. Trucks that had been idling for hours are now moving in tighter, more disciplined streams. At forward depots near Le Mans and Chartres, tanker trucks arrive in greater numbers than the previous day. Drivers pull in exhausted but intact. Fuel is pumped into storage bladders, then immediately redistributed to waiting armored columns. Quartermasters work with grim efficiency, no celebration, no delay, only calculation and movement. Patton's staff has made hard choices. Fuel is concentrated, not scattered. Priority is given to 3 spearheads of the Third Army. The 4th Armored Division pushing toward the Seine, the 6th Armored Division moving northeast toward Argentan, and elements of the 5th Infantry Division securing critical road junctions. Other units receive just enough to hold their positions. The entire system now breathes with a single purpose: restart momentum where it matters most. By mid-morning, engines across the front roar back to life. Sherman tanks that had been silent overnight lurch forward in clouds of dust. Half-tracks roll past hedgerows, shattered by weeks of fighting. Reconnaissance units probe ahead, confirming that German resistance remains fractured and disorganized. For the first time in days, the Third Army is not creeping, it is accelerating. Along the Red Ball Express, the change is visible. Convoys move with fewer stops. Military police, at key intersections, report smoother traffic flow. Broken-down trucks are cleared more quickly, pushed to the shoulder, and replaced without halting entire columns. At critical choke points, engineers have widened roads, filled craters, and reinforced weak bridges with temporary Bailey structures that can carry the weight of fully loaded tankers. Late in the afternoon, fuel reaches the forward armored spearheads in decisive quantities. Near Dro, tank crews refuel rapidly from mobile tankers positioned close to the front, an improvisation that reduces turnaround time and keeps momentum alive. Within hours, the 4th Armored Division surges east again, pushing toward the Seine crossings with renewed force. German rearguards attempt to delay the advance, but their positions are overrun in swift, coordinated thrusts. By August 27th, the breakthrough of supply translates into battlefield reality. Patton's forces reach the Seine at multiple points. Bridges, some damaged but not destroyed, become focal points of the push. Engineers work under pressure to secure crossings while armored units press forward relentlessly. In places where bridges are blown, assault units force river crossings with pontoon equipment, knowing that once across, fuel and supplies must follow immediately. At Mantes Gassecourt, elements of the 4th Armored Division cross the river after intense but brief fighting. German units, already in disarray, cannot mount an organized counterattack. Tanks fan out on the eastern bank, moving toward the outskirts of Paris and beyond, while supply trucks begin the long, dangerous journey to bring fuel across the same bridges. The logistical machine does not pause. Behind the tanks, convoys continue to stream east, now carrying not just fuel, but ammunition, spare parts, and rations that allow the advance to become self-sustaining once again. Temporary forward depots are established closer to the front, reducing the distance that trucks must travel. The one-stretched supply lines shorten, even as the army moves farther into France. On August 25th to 26th, Paris is liberated. Although not directly seized by Patton's Third Army, the liberation is made possible by the overall Allied momentum that his advance helped create. The crisis of fuel has not only been managed, it has been transformed into renewed strategic pressure. Hermann-Führer is already reeling. Now face a coordinated Allied push across multiple axes. Patton senses the shift immediately. His headquarters issues a new series of aggressive orders. The Third Army does not slow after crossing the Seine. Instead, it drives toward the Meuse and Moselle rivers, setting the stage for the next phase of the campaign. What had seemed, days earlier, like a dangerous overextension, now appears as calculated momentum restored. The Red Ball Express reaches its peak during this period. At its aid, more than 6,000 trucks are in constant motion along its routes, delivering over 12,000 tons of supplies per day. Fuel remains the priority, but the system now carries everything the Third Army needs to fight at full strength. What began as an emergency improvisation has become a functioning logistical artery of continental scale. German commanders recognized too late what has happened. They had expected the American advance to stall permanently under its own weight. Instead, they watch in disbelief as fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements continue to pour eastward in an unbroken stream. Every attempt to disrupt supply lines, demolitions, ambushes, rearguard actions fails to create more than temporary delay. By the end of August, the turning point is unmistakable. The fuel crisis that had threatened to halt Patton's Third Army has not only been overcome, it has been used to refine and harden the Allied logistical system. Roads that once felt fragile now function as secure lifelines. Convoys that once crept now surge. What had been a vulnerability becomes a proven strength. On the battlefield, the results are decisive. German forces in northern and central France collapse into full retreat. Equipment is abandoned along roads. Entire units surrender or disintegrate. The Third Army advances farther and faster than many planners had believed possible just weeks earlier. Yet amid the speed and success, the true victory is quieter. It is the victory of organization over chaos, of coordination over panic, of logistics over limitation. Patton's dash across France is remembered for its armored thrusts and dramatic captures, but it is made possible by the unseen army of drivers, mechanics, engineers, and quartermasters who turned a near-paralyzing shortage into a sustained offensive. As September approaches, the Third Army rolls toward the German border. The roads stretch ahead, now familiar rather than ominous. Trucks still grind along them day and night, carrying the same lifeblood of fuel that had once been so scarce. The pause of late August fades into memory, replaced by a renewed sense of inevitability. The enemy has not been defeated by a single battle. It has been outpaced, outsupplied, and ultimately overwhelmed by a system that refused to stop. And in that realization lies the true turning point of the campaign. The moment when American logistics proved that it could not only support rapid movement, but define it. The war in France has changed. The balance has tipped not just because Patton's tanks moved forward, but because the trucks behind them never did.
The days after the late August crisis feel quieter, but only on the surface. Beneath that calm, the shape of the campaign has permanently shifted. By August 28th to 30th, 1944, the German position in northern and central France has ceased to be a coordinated defense. What remains is a long, unraveling retreat. Columns of German soldiers move east along battered roads, often on foot, their vehicles abandoned for lack of fuel or destroyed by Allied air attacks. Burned-out trucks, overturned half-tracks, and shattered artillery pieces litter crossroads and riverbanks like the debris of a broken machine. Patton's Third Army does not pause to savor the moment. Armored divisions press toward the Meuse and Moselle, their pace now supported rather than restrained by logistics. Town after town falls with minimal resistance, Reims, Verdun, Metz looming ahead. In many places, German units surrender. As soon as American tanks appear on the horizon, knowing that further resistance is futile against an enemy that can move and resupply so relentlessly, casualty figures begin to take shape. In the closing of the Falaise pocket and the subsequent pursuit across France, German losses are staggering, tens of thousands killed or captured. Hundreds of tanks and vehicles destroyed or abandoned, entire formations effectively erased from the order of battle. Allied casualties, though still significant. Paris, liberated on August 25th, becomes a symbol of that transformation. Crowds fill the streets. French flags appear on balconies, are far lower than in the grinding weeks of Normandy. The character of the fighting has changed from attritional struggle to mobile collapse. Allied soldiers move through cheering civilians rather than rubble-strewn hedgerows. Yet behind the celebration lies a harder reality. The liberation was not just the result of battlefield bravery, but of logistical pressure that made sustained German occupation impossible. The steady flow of fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements across France had turned German resistance into a losing race against time. Along the Red Ball routes, the atmosphere shifts as well. Convoys still rolled day and night, but the sense of crisis has eased. Drivers, mechanics, and traffic controllers continue their work with the same discipline. Yet there is now a quiet confidence beneath the exhaustion. What had once felt like an emergency improvisation is now an accepted part of how the war is fought. Material consequences are visible everywhere. Forward depots move farther east, closer to the advancing front. Temporary storage sites near Le Mans and Chartres give way to new hubs along the Seine and beyond. Engineers accelerate bridge repairs. knowing that every restored crossing shortens supply distances and increases operational flexibility. Roads that were once fragile lifelines become established military arteries. The balance of initiative has decisively shifted. German commanders, already reeling from the loss of their forces in Normandy, now face a Western front that is collapsing faster than they can stabilize it. Orders from Berlin grow increasingly disconnected from reality on the ground. Units are told to hold positions that no longer exist, defend lines that have already been bypassed, or counterattack with forces that have been destroyed. For the Allies, momentum becomes strategy. Patton's Third Army is no longer seen as a risky spearhead that might overextend itself. Instead, it becomes a model of how speed, when properly supported by logistics, can achieve strategic results. Other Allied formations adjust their own tempo, seeking to exploit the same combination of mobility and supply that has carried Patton across France. Yet the aftermath is not purely triumphant. French civilians bear the scars of the retreat: destroyed bridges, damaged towns, disrupted railways, and shortages that will take months to repair. Roads that carried Allied trucks have also carried war through their communities. Liberation arrives alongside the noise of engines, the dust of convoys, and the presence of foreign armies that will remain for years. By the end of August, the immediate verdict is clear. The German army in western France has been shattered. The Allied advance has become unstoppable in the short term. And the logistical system that once teetered on collapse has emerged stronger, more organized, and more confident than before. The pause of late August has not weakened the campaign. It has clarified it. What began as a fuel crisis has ended as proof that American logistics can absorb strain, adapt under pressure, and ultimately sustain one of the fastest armored advances in modern military history. The roads that once threatened to stop Patton now carry him toward the German border. And as the trucks roll east into September, they carry not just supplies, but the unmistakable consequence of August's turning point, a war that is no longer in doubt on the Western Front. Only its final shape remains to be decided. September 1944 opens. On a different war than the one that began in June. The front lines have moved hundreds of miles. The geography of fighting has shifted from hedgerows to rivers, from narrow lanes to continental highways. More importantly, the logic of Allied warfare has been reshaped by what the Red Ball Express and Patton's advance proved. At SHAEF, the crisis of August becomes a lesson rather than a warning. Eisenhower's planners study what has happened with forensic care. They conclude that the limiting factor in modern mobile warfare is not bravery, not even firepower, but the ability to move fuel and material at scale. Operational plans for the rest of 1944 are adjusted accordingly. Greater emphasis is placed on repairing railways rapidly. Expanding pipeline projects such as Pluto pipeline under the ocean, and establishing deeper forward supply bases before major offensives. The Red Ball Express itself evolves. What began as an emergency improvisation is formalized into a more permanent system of priority routes, standardized procedures, and clearer command relationships. Traffic regulation improves. Maintenance units are reorganized to reduce breakdown rates. Driver rotations are refined, though exhaustion never fully disappears. The principle is now established. If an army must move fast, logistics must be designed to move faster. Patton's reputation is also transformed. Within the Allied High Command, he is no longer viewed merely as a brilliant but reckless commander. His August dash, once feared as potentially catastrophic, becomes evidence that aggression, when paired with logistical adaptability, can deliver decisive strategic gains. Future operations in Lorraine and toward the Saar are planned with Patton's tempo in mind. Even as supply realities continue to impose limits. German strategy is reshaped as well, though in darker ways. The Wehrmacht's failure to halt the American advance in France convinces German commanders that they can no longer fight the Western Allies in open, mobile warfare. Attention shifts toward defensive lines along major rivers, the Siegfried Line, Westwall, the Rhine, and later the Ardennes. The hope becomes delay rather than victory. Slow the Allies long enough to consolidate forces, buy time, and perhaps